Alright, welcome back everyone. My name is Duffie, and this is the Unit 2 lecture. Unit 2 covers Chapter 2 in the Shelley Cashman Discovering Computers book. As always, unit lectures are not intended to replace chapter readings or independent study. So in this lecture we're going to be taking a high-level look at some of the big ideas and concepts in Chapter 2, the Internet and World Wide Web. We'll be looking at a subset of the PowerPoint slides for this unit. So the first idea that I would like to discuss is the idea that today's Internet is not the same as the Internet from 1969, when the Internet was born. In 1969, we didn't have the graphical user interface. We didn't really have we didn't even have personal computers at that point. Personal computers were still 5-6 years away. So the Internet was a very, very different thing than what we think of today when we think about the Internet. Yet the Internet has grown and evolved from a small network, and since we can trace our history back to that first few nodes on the Internet, we still call it the Internet, but it really is something completely different than what it was in 1969. The other idea is the idea that the World Wide Web that most of us think of when we think about the Internet is not the Internet. There's a lot of things that happen on the Internet, voice over IP, gaming servers and that sort of thing, which really are completely independent of the Internet. You think of something like Google Earth, which is an application that runs on the Internet but is not a web application. And yet, by far, web browsers make up the predominant use of the Internet in terms of what consumers and people like you and me do and use the Internet for. Okay, so just a little bit of history here. The ARPANET. ARPA, by the way, stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency, and it was part of the DARPA, Department of Advanced Research Projects Agency, which came about kind of in the shadow of the Cold War with Russia. I think that this idea that that it would be able to survive a nuclear attack, that's probably a little bit overstated. Something that the Rand Corporation propagated that idea, but there's certainly a sense in which the Internet, it was certainly a government project. It cost $1 million at the time. Came out of this DARPA department. $1 million in 1969 was a lot of money, but not compared to what was being spent on Apollo and some of those other big projects that were happening at the time. By the way, if you want to think about a historical event that coincides with the creation of the Internet, I think we'd have to say that Armstrong walking on the moon in 1969, within just a couple of weeks of when the first two nodes on the Internet actually were connected together, would probably be a good historical event to hang that date on. Okay, so who were the first institutions that were on the Internet or made up the Internet? The first four, and let me see if I can just step out of PowerPoint for just a second here, see how this works. This is a website that is a little bit obsolete, but I still like it. It's if you search for Atlas of Cyberspace, they've got all kinds of cool artistic and geographic renderings and maps of what the Internet maybe looks like, going all the way back to Tron. Really highly recommend this particular website. But they have a link that's historical. See if I can find it here. Historical. I'm going to click on that, and we've got some old drawings. The first UCLA connection. These are kind of like napkin drawings. And here's one you can actually see. So we've got UCLA, which was the first computer that was connected to another computer via this IMP, which is like a router, this giant router. And then SRI, which is Stanford Research Institute up in Northern California, was the second institution. And then we have UCSB, which is University of California, Santa Barbara. and then number 4 was University of Utah. So these 4 computers, one was a Sigma 7, one was a PDP-10, here's an IBM 360. These computers were eventually connected together and made up what we would call the internet. So the first connection was in September, and then by December, a couple of months later, we actually have 4 nodes on the internet. Pretty amazing. And we can begin to see that we connect in Rand here, and Carnegie, and Harvard, and we can begin to see the internet now beginning to grow. And notice it's growing out of these educational institutions, and it's the government that's funding this. It's $1 million the government is putting toward creating this this network. $1 million at the same time as the government is spending billions of dollars trying to put a man on the moon. All right, let's see if we can get back into our PowerPoint here. I think I do that by minimizing this. All right. All right, so we go from just a few nodes to what we have today, which are hundreds of millions of computers, clients and servers connected together in this global network, which we call the internet. Today we have lots of different ways of connecting to the internet. Fiber is what I'm using here at home. Cable, wireless. I have a little cell phone which I can access the internet with. So this goes back to that idea of ubiquitous access. The internet is ubiquitous, is everywhere, and so we see that here in some of these ideas in Chapter 2. Okay, probably the most important technical idea here as we talk about the internet is the idea of an IP address, and my colleague Guy would probably want to talk about TCP/IP if he had a chance to talk to you. He would be interested in that. But the IP address is the idea that every computer on the internet has an address, just like every phone has a phone number, each person has a social security number. Each client and server on the internet has an IP address, and you will notice that the IP address is made up of a quartet, 4 numbers separated by periods, and that's really important to remember. 4 numbers separated by periods. They are actually numbers between 0 and 255, and that is actually, each of these numbers is represented by what we call 8 bits. So if we have 4 of those, we have 32 bits. By the way, might be interesting to, I'm not sure how, if I can do this, just to talk about IP version 4 for just a second, which is the current version of the internet protocol addressing. I could go to the calculator. Well, let me do that. And I'm going to go to the scientific calculator, and I'm going to go 2, and then I'm going to hit the, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to hit the XY button, 2 to the 32 power, which is 32 bits, equals, and you'll see that it's a little over 4 billion possible addresses. 4 billion addresses. That's less addresses than we have people in the world. So we are rapidly running out of IP addresses. We refer to that as IP address exhaustion, and we have a new naming scheme that's coming out, which is IP version 6 or IPv6. So if you want to look that up, you could look that up on Wikipedia, and of course it's going to be a very tumultuous transition, for the industry to get all the routers and everything else up to the new addressing scheme. Underneath the IP address, we have this idea which came along much later, which is the idea of a URL domain name, and in this case we have something like www.google.com. The last part of the domain name is called the top level domain. So .com, .net, in the United Kingdom would be .uk. Vatican has their own domain. There's .edu, .mil for military, and these top-level domains are really important in helping the routers know how to route requests to the appropriate IP address. So behind an IP address, behind a domain name is an IP address. Okay, so let's see if we can move these slides forward. I guess I have to move the focus. I have two monitors here. Here we go. So we're moving to the World Wide Web. Remember at the beginning we said that the World Wide Web is not the same thing as the Internet. The World Wide Web comes along in 1989. The Internet is born in 1969. So it takes 20 years for us to go from the text-based Internet. As the Internet grows, personal computers come along in the mid-70s, and then by 1989, the end of the 80s, the end of that 80s decade, along comes a person by the name of Tim Berners-Lee, or Tim Berners-Lee, a European guy that works at CERN in Switzerland. And we can't talk about the World Wide Web without taking at least a couple of minutes and talking about Tim Berners-Lee. So let me see if we can get one more website here. I really like this particular article. You can find it by searching for Internet Pioneers. That should bring you here to ibiblio.org, and I'm going to click on Tim Berners-Lee, and you can kind of take a look at this on your own. I'm curious as to whether I can adjust the size here. Cool. So there's a picture of CERN in Switzerland. That's, by the way, where they have that new particle accelerator collider, super collider. That's happening at CERN, where they think that they might create a black hole and the whole world and universe may implode. Just kidding. But there's a lot of people, right, that are very interested in what's going on in terms of that particle physics business. So this is where Tim Berners-Lee is working, and he has this idea to create a World Wide Web, and he tries to sell his creation, the idea, at CERN as a way to link the computers that were there. They really don't even acknowledge his idea. He decides to do it anyway, and Tim Berners-Lee gives us HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And you can see that up at the top of any web page. You see HTTP right up here at the top. So he created the protocol. He creates the first browser. He creates the first web server. He creates HTML. He brings all these things together. He creates the idea or introduces the idea of the URL. So Tim Berners-Lee single-handedly brings us the HTTP protocol that sits on top of the TCP/IP protocol. He gives us the first browser and server, and he brings us the URL and the actual HTML. And one person brings this, and rather than patenting it and selling it, he basically gives it away for free. And this is really why we have the World Wide Web today as this really heterogeneous, ubiquitous platform that everyone is able to use. So great stuff, a great story. Highly recommend taking some time and actually looking at that. All right. So all of these things that we think about with the World Wide Web, we really think of 1989 and Tim Berners-Lee. And of course the browser is the key feature here, and we have lots of different browsers. Some of these browsers are better at others for certain types of tasks. For instance, Opera, Safari, and Chrome are all now really kind of angling toward more mobile type devices. You think about the new iPad's going to be running Safari, and the new Android phones are going to be running Chrome. Opera has always been a really lightweight browser. So different companies, different organizations, but they're all using the same HTTP, the same HTML, the same basic underlying plumbing that makes the World Wide Web work. Okay, so kind of end to end, this idea of a browser connects to a server. And one of the things that I'd like to take a look at, and we'll see how this actually works. I'm going to try to, this is something that you can try. I'm going to try to go to, and you should be able to do this in XP or Vista or Windows 7. I'm using Windows 7. I'm going to go to Accessories, and I'm going to go to the Command Prompt. And I know that this will be difficult to actually read, but I'm going to type Traceroute, RT, T-R-A-C-E-R-T, and then I'm going to type msjc.edu. And the idea here is I'm on a client, I'm on a browser, and I'm going to try to connect to a server at a remote location. So I'm going from a source to a destination, from a browser to a server. And I really don't want to reveal my IP address necessarily. Not that it's like terribly private, but it's not something that you really want to just give out. I'm going to move this over on another screen, and I'm going to run the Traceroute. And it's moving from IP address to IP address. I'm going to move it back over in a second, and hopefully I can hide my personal IP address and let you see everyone else's. Alright, I think that that's maybe usable. Well, you have to try this. Traceroute, T-R-A-C-E-R-T, and then space, and then the location where you want to go. And you can see here that we're tracing a route to the MSJC server, which is 207.233.7.9. And you could actually type that in your browser, 207.233.7.9, and it would actually take you to msjc.edu. And you can see here other IP addresses along the way as it goes from computer to computer and eventually makes its way. And this kind of miserable, I can't make it any wider because this is old console, but you can see the IP address is kind of wrapping around 4.59.48.178, 137.164. And the idea is we move, the communication goes from computer server to computer server, right, in this path from the browser to the server and then back from the server to the client. Okay, so that's kind of a cool thing to actually try out as you kind of try to understand what's actually going on kind of behind the scenes. Okay, those are the main high-level concepts here. I don't think I need to go through the rest of these. Remember, the full set of PowerPoint slides for the unit are available in the unit folder, and this is just a short companion lecture to go along with the Unit 2 material. Again, the big ideas, if I were to summarize here, the Internet comes along in 1969. It's a $1 million project for the government, Department of Advanced Research Projects Agency, and they called it the ARPANET, and then that later became known as the Internet. The World Wide Web comes along 20 years later, almost exactly 20 years later, in 1989, and we have Tim Berners-Lee to thank for that, and he gives us HTTP, HTML, browsers, servers, and the idea of the URL. Remember, an Internet IP address is 4 numbers separated by periods, and we've got a total of about 4 billion of those to work with, and they're on everything from copy machines to cell phones to set-top boxes, and so that's why we're running out of those IP version 4 addresses. Remember that, going back to the history briefly, that we have 4 institutions. Those were UCLA was the first one, and then we have Stanford Research Institute and University of Utah and University of California, Santa Barbara, that make up the Internet, and that was all happening right around the time that Apollo 11 happens and Armstrong steps on the moon. Okay, so that'll conclude the high-level look at Chapter 2 and Unit 2. And make sure you spend some time and take a look at the full unit PowerPoint and, of course, the companion worksheet.